The night I saw my dead son's bracelet on a stranger's wrist, I was working the late shift at a Route 66 diner while snow slapped against the windows like someone trying to get in. I was carrying a pot of coffee past booth 7 when the door opened and a man stepped inside with a little boy tucked against his side. The man looked tired, unshaven, careful. The boy looked about 10, maybe 11, with a brown knit hat pulled low over his ears and eyes that made my chest tighten before I understood why. I asked if they wanted coffee and hot chocolate. The man nodded. The boy reached for a menu. That was when I saw the bracelet. A thin silver band. Scratched near the clasp. Too small for his wrist now, but still fastened there like he never took it off. My hand went numb around the coffee pot. Because 10 years earlier, I had put that bracelet on my baby son, Ethan, before the hospital told me he died. I remembered the engraving because I had paid extra for it with tips from 3 double shifts. Always my little star. The coffee pot slipped from my hand and shattered across the tile. Hot coffee spread under the counter. Everyone in the diner turned. The man stood so fast his chair scraped backward. He pulled the boy behind him with one arm, like he had been waiting years for someone to notice. I could barely breathe. "Where did you get that bracelet?" I asked. The boy looked down at his wrist, confused. "My dad said I've had it since I was a baby." The man's face changed. Not anger first. Fear. He threw cash on the table and said, "We're leaving." I stepped in front of the booth before I could stop myself. "That bracelet belonged to my son." The man's jaw tightened. "You're mistaken." "I'm not," I whispered. His name was Ethan. The boy stared at me. Then he said the words that made the whole diner go silent. "My dad said my name used to be something else." For 10 years I had believed my baby was buried under a small stone with a date I could not look at without breaking. But that night, in a roadside diner full of strangers and falling snow, the child wearing his bracelet looked at me with my son's eyes. And the man holding his shoulder looked like he already knew the truth. Before that night I had spent 10 years teaching myself how to live with an empty space. My name is Sarah Miller, and I was 22 when Ethan was born. I was not ready in the way people say a mother should be ready. I had no husband, no savings, no house with a nursery painted soft blue. I had a rented room behind a laundromat, a used crib from a church donation box, and a waitress uniform that smelled like coffee no matter how many times I washed it. But the first time they placed Ethan on my chest, none of that mattered. He was tiny, warm, and furious at the world. His fists were clenched like he had arrived ready to fight. I remember laughing through tears and telling him, "It's okay, little star. I've got you." That became our song. Our promise. Every night, even when I was exhausted, I would rock him near the window and hum "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," until his breathing softened against my shoulder. The bracelet came later. It was not expensive, but it was the nicest thing I had ever bought for anyone. A thin silver baby bracelet with his initials engraved inside. Always my little star. When Ethan was 4 months old, he got sick. At first, I thought it was a fever babies got and survived. Then his skin felt too hot, his crying weakened, and I drove to the county hospital with one hand on the wheel and one hand reaching back to touch his car seat at every red light. The hospital took him quickly. Too quickly. A nurse told me to wait outside while they stabilized him. I remember white lights, plastic chairs, the smell of disinfectant, and my own shoes squeaking every time I stood up to ask if anyone had news. Hours later, a doctor came out with a face already arranged for bad news. He said there had been complications. He said they had done everything. He said my son was gone. I remember asking to hold Ethan. They let me see him only briefly. Too briefly. His body was wrapped, his face pale, and when I touched his wrist, the bracelet was missing. A nurse said it must have been removed during treatment. Later, the hospital told me it was lost. Lost. As if a mother could misplace the last piece of her child and simply move on. After that, I became a person who worked because stopping felt dangerous. I left that town, took shifts wherever I could, and eventually ended up at the Route 66 diner where truckers, travelers, and lonely people came in from the cold. Every year on Ethan's birthday, I sat in the last booth after closing with a cupcake and one candle. I never posted about it. I never told customers. I just sang our song under my breath, and imagined what he might have looked like if life had been kinder. So when that boy walked into my diner wearing Ethan's bracelet, It did not feel like coincidence. It felt like the empty space in my life had suddenly turned around and looked back at me. And if you have ever lost someone and still felt they were trying to reach you somehow, tell me in the comments whether you would have let that man walk away, or whether you would have followed the only clue you had left. The man grabbed the boy's coat from the booth and moved like he needed to get out before the walls started talking. I stepped in front of him not because I was brave, but because my body moved before my fear could stop it. Please, I said. Just tell me where he got the bracelet. The boy looked between us, confused and frightened. Dad. The man put one hand on his shoulder. Luke, don't answer her. Luke. That name hit me wrong. The boy was the right age. He had Ethan's eyes. And he was wearing the bracelet the hospital told me had disappeared from my dead baby's wrist. I pointed to the silver band. There are initials inside. That was made for my son. His name was Ethan Miller. The man's face went pale, but his voice turned hard. Lady, you're making a mistake. Then let me see the engraving. No. That single word told me more than any explanation could have. The diner had gone quiet around us. A trucker at the counter lowered his fork. My manager, Ruth, stepped out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes moving from the broken coffee pot to the boy's wrist. I tried to keep my voice steady. What is his birthday? The man snapped. That is none of your business. But Luke answered before he could stop him. March 12th. My knees almost gave out. Ethan had been born on March 12th. The man tightened his grip on Luke's shoulder. We're done here, I whispered. What hospital was he born in? He leaned closer, his eyes sharp now. You need help. And if you keep scaring my son, I'll call the police. But Luke was staring at me differently. Not afraid anymore. Curious. Then he said, How do you know that song? I froze. What song? The Little Star Song, he said. Sometimes I dream about it. Dad says I made it up when I was little. The room blurred. I had sung Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star to Ethan every night of his short life. I sang it in the hospital waiting room while a nurse told me to calm down. I sang it at his tiny grave until my throat stopped working. The man pulled Luke toward the door. This time I did not try to grab him. I did not scream. I did not chase them into the snow. I only watched through the window as they climbed into a dark pickup truck and drove away under the neon Route 66 sign. But before they left, Ruth stepped beside me and quietly held up her phone. I got the plate, she said. That was when I understood something terrible. If I was wrong, I had just frightened an innocent child. But if I was right, I had just watched my son walk out of my life for the second time. And this time I was not going to let a hospital, a stranger, or a missing record bury the truth again. I did not follow the truck. Every desperate part of me wanted to. I wanted to run into the snow, chase the taillights, bang on the window, and beg that boy to let me see the bracelet one more time. But I had already lost Ethan once inside a system that treated my grief like paperwork. I knew that if I acted wild now, they would use my panic against me. So I did the hardest thing. I stood still. Ruth locked the diner door after the last customer left and printed the camera footage from the register computer. The video showed the boy's face clearly. It showed the silver bracelet on his wrist. It showed the man pulling him away the moment I mentioned Ethan's name. Ruth also wrote down the license plate from the pickup. You need a lawyer, Sarah, she said. Not Facebook. Not rumors. A real lawyer. By sunrise, I was sitting on my bedroom floor with the old blue memory box in front of me. Inside were the only pieces of Ethan I had left. His birth certificate, hospital discharge papers from when he was born, the death certificate, medical bills, 2 baby photos, and the receipt from the jeweler who made the bracelet. The receipt had the engraving written on it. Always my little star. I called that jeweler first. He was retired now, but his daughter still ran the shop. She found the old order in a paper file and confirmed it had been a custom piece. 1 bracelet. 1 engraving. No duplicat. Then I called a family attorney in Oklahoma City. Her name was Denise Alvarez, and she listened without interrupting while I told her everything. When I finished, she gave me rules. Do not contact the man directly. Do not approach the child. Do not post the video. Do not accuse anyone without records. Find the paper trail, she said. If there was a false death record or an illegal transfer, There will be a mistake somewhere. So I started digging. The hospital where Ethan had died was closed now, but old county records still existed. Denise helped me request archived files. I found out the doctor who signed Ethan's death certificate had later been sued for falsifying patient documents. Then a former nurse I knew told me something worse. The hospital had been investigated years ago for missing newborn records and questionable private adoptions. That was when fear turned into certainty. I gave Denise the diner footage, the license plate, the bracelet receipt, Ethan's records, and every memory I had spent 10 years trying not to touch. For the first time since the hospital took my baby behind those white doors, I was not just grieving. I was building a case. And somewhere out there, a boy named Luke was wearing the only thing that could prove he might have once been Ethan. Denise found the first crack in the story 3 days later. She called me at the diner before my shift started and told me to sit down. There was another baby transferred out of that hospital the night Ethan was declared dead, she said. I gripped the counter. What does that mean? It means the records do not match. The archived file showed a male infant move through something called an emergency private placement. His name had been changed twice in the paperwork. The birth date was March 12th. His weight was almost identical to Ethan's. Even the hospital wristband code was only 1 digit different from the number on Ethan's newborn chart. And the woman who signed the transfer was the same social worker later investigated for illegal adoption arrangements. I felt the room tilt. Denise kept digging. With the license plate Ruth had saved, she identified the man from the diner as Mark Ellison. Public records showed he had raised a boy named Luke for almost 10 years. But there was no normal birth record attached to Mark as a biological father. Luke had entered his life through Mark's younger sister, who had died years earlier. When Denise sent a formal letter, Mark refused at first. He called me unstable. He said I was trying to steal his son. He said Luke had already lost enough. But then Denise attached 3 things: Ethan's baby photo, the bracelet receipt, and a still frame from the diner camera showing the silver band on Luke's wrist. The next day Mark called her back. He admitted that he had always known Luke's paperwork was strange. His sister had brought the baby to him, saying the mother could not keep him and the adoption was private but legal. Later, when Mark asked questions, the social worker told him the file was sealed and warned him not to dig unless he wanted the child taken away. So he stayed quiet. Not because he had stolen Luke, but because he was terrified of losing him. The DNA test was ordered through Denise, with Mark's reluctant agreement. I gave my sample in a small clinic room with shaking hands. Luke gave his 2 towns over. The results came back on a Friday afternoon. Denise read them to me slowly. Probability of maternity: 99.999%. For 10 years I had mourned a son who was still alive. His name was Luke now. But before that, he had been Ethan. And the bracelet had brought him home. After the DNA test, Denise told me the hardest part was not proving Luke was my son. It was protecting him from the shock of that truth. A court hearing was scheduled within days. Denise filed to correct the false death record, reopen the old hospital case, and establish my legal maternity. Mark appeared with his own attorney, looking exhausted and terrified. He did not look like a monster. He looked like a father who had built his whole life around a boy he was afraid to lose. The judge reviewed the DNA results, the bracelet receipt, the hospital records, and the transfer file with the altered names. Then she ordered county investigators to reopen everything connected to the old hospital, the doctor who signed Ethan's death certificate, and the social worker who had arranged the private placement. For the first time, people with authority said what I had felt in my bones. My baby had not died that night. He had been taken out of the hospital under a lie. But the judge also made something clear. Luke was not a piece of property to be handed from one adult to another. He was a child who had lived 10 years as Mark's son. So the court gave me legal recognition as his biological mother, but kept Mark in his life while the investigation continued. We were ordered into family counseling. The first session was awkward and painful. Luke sat between us, twisting the bracelet around his wrist. I wanted to hug him. Mark looked like he wanted to disappear. None of us knew how to be a family without hurting each other. Then Luke looked at me and asked, "Do I have to stop being Luke?" I shook my head before anyone else could answer. "No," I said. "You don't have to stop being anyone." That was the moment everything changed. I was not there to erase Mark. I was not there to steal a childhood Luke already had. I was there because my son had been stolen from me, and now we all had to tell the truth without breaking him again. Outside that room, investigators followed the records. Inside it, we learned how to sit together without running. The investigation did not give me back the 10 years I lost. Nothing could. The old hospital was gone, but its records were not. County investigators found altered files, missing signatures, and other families with stories that sounded too much like mine. The doctor who signed Ethan's death certificate was already facing other claims, and the social worker who moved him through that private placement became the center of a criminal investigation. Mark was not charged with kidnapping. The court believed he had been lied to too, even if his silence had helped the lie survive longer than it should have. He apologized to me one afternoon outside the courthouse, his voice rough, his eyes on the pavement. "I was afraid they would take him," he said. I answered honestly. So was I. That was the first thing we truly had in common. Luke did not start calling me Mom right away. I did not ask him to. Some days he called me Sarah. Some days he said nothing at all. But he came to the diner every Saturday with Mark, sitting in booth 7, asking small questions about Ethan like he was learning about a version of himself from another life. A few months later, on March 12th, I placed a cupcake in front of him with one candle. "This was always your birthday," I said. "I kept it for you." Luke looked down at the silver bracelet on his wrist, then back at me. "Can you sing the song?" he asked. My voice broke before the first line was over. Mark sat across from us, quiet, letting the moment belong to the truth instead of fear. Luke did not choose between us that day. He did not have to. He simply reached across the table and took my hand while I sang the lullaby I thought had died with him. I learned that truth does not always arrive like justice in a courtroom. Sometimes it comes back as a scratched silver bracelet on a child's wrist, a song remembered in a dream, or one record someone forgot to destroy. And if this story stayed with you, leave your thoughts in the comments, share it with someone who believes a mother's instinct can survive anything, and subscribe for more stories where the truth finally finds its way home.